The Taklamakan Desert covers an area larger than most European countries, 337,000 square kilometers of sand, dunes that move every year. Average annual rainfall below 100 millimeters, roughly 10 times less than what falls on California. For most of human history, the Taklamakan was considered functionally permanent. You did not green it, you did not transform it. You worked around it, or you accepted that it would slowly expand and consume whatever you tried to build at its edges. That assumption held for thousands of years. Then China decided to test it. What is happening right now along the edges of the Taklamakan is one of the most ambitious, large-scale ecological projects ever attempted by any nation. The Chinese name for it translates roughly as the Green Great Wall. The internal program designation is the 3 North Shelter Forest Program. The goal is to plant 35 million hectares of new forest by the year 2050, transforming a band of land approximately 4,500 kilometers long, stretching from western Xinjiang all the way to northeast Heilongjiang. That is a forest belt the length of the continental United States from coast to coast, built deliberately, mostly by hand, in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how this is being done, what techniques actually work in a desert that gets less rain in a year than most cities get in a heavy summer week, and the real reason a growing number of ecologists are worried that all of this might not last as long as the official numbers suggest. If stories like this are what you come here for, hit like and subscribe before we go any further. Let us get into it. The enemy that came in the form of dust. To understand why China is doing this, you have to understand what the deserts of northern China have actually meant for the people living near them. This is not a postcard problem. For most of the late 20th century, the deserts of northern and western China were actively expanding. Each spring, monsoon winds picked up enormous volumes of fine dust from the Gobi and the Taklamakan and carried it east. The dust storms reached Beijing routinely, often turning daylight into something closer to twilight. In the worst years of the 1990s, residents of Beijing wore protective masks for more than 80 days each year just to filter out the desert dust. Hospitals reported elevated respiratory cases. Aircraft were grounded. Crops were buried under wind-carried silt that had originated thousands of kilometers away. The deserts were not staying put. They were spreading. Decades of overgrazing, deforestation, and aggressive groundwater extraction had stripped vegetation cover from huge areas of land. Once that vegetation was gone, the wind started doing what wind always does to bare ground. It moved it. By the 1970s, China was losing thousands of square kilometers of usable land every year to advancing dunes. Entire villages had been buried. Cities downwind from the desert were experiencing measurable degradation in air quality and direct economic costs in the billions. In 1978, the Chinese government decided this could not continue. The result was a national program of a scale that nobody had ever attempted before, the largest planting project in human history. The official goal of the 3 North Shelter Forest Program is straightforward to state and almost impossibly ambitious to execute. Plant 35 million hectares of new forest by 2050. Increase national forest cover from 10% in 1949 to over 25% today. Use that forest cover to physically block the spread of the deserts, hold the soil in place, and give the surrounding ecosystems a chance to stabilize. The numbers are staggering. Over 4,500 kilometers of forest belt running across the entire northern face of the country. Hundreds of millions of trees planted with new ones added every year. Tens of millions of workers involved across multiple decades. This is not a single forest. It is a network of thousands of forests, windbreak belts, plantations, and stabilized dune fields. all working together across radically different geographies. In some places, the program means dense plantations of fast-growing poplar trees designed to break wind speeds before they reach inhabited areas. In other places, it means scrubby, slow-growing native shrubs that hold sand in place without requiring much water. In the most extreme zones, it means engineering interventions in the sand itself before any plant has a chance of surviving. That last category is where the project becomes genuinely interesting. The straw checkerboard. If you flew over certain sections of the Taklamakan from above, you would see something that looks like a giant board game. Geometric squares of yellow straw laid in precise diagonal grids across the dunes, stretching to the horizon. Each square is approximately 6 meters across. Each square is built by hand, and each square is what makes the rest of the restoration program possible. Wind moving across an open dune face picks up loose grains of sand and carries them, building up against any obstacle and eroding away from any exposed slope. That movement is what makes a dune migrate. It is also what kills any seedling planted on a bare dune within a few hours of being placed in the ground. A grid of straw, laid into shallow trenches and partially buried, breaks the wind pattern at ground level. Each square creates a small zone of calm air, protected from the dominant wind direction. Inside that zone, sand stops moving. Moisture from morning dew can accumulate on the straw and seep into the soil instead of evaporating. The temperature of the surface drops by several degrees compared to exposed sand. A seedling planted in the center of one of these protected squares has a meaningful chance of survival. A seedling planted on bare dune does not. The straw itself is doing more than blocking wind. Over the course of 1 or 2 years, it gradually decomposes. Wind, dew, and microbes break it down into organic matter that mixes with the surface sand and starts the slow process of building actual soil where there was previously none. The straw vanishes. What it leaves behind is the foundation for everything that comes next. Building a single square is straightforward. Building millions of them across hundreds of square kilometers of remote desert, with surface temperatures regularly exceeding 49 degrees Celsius, is something else entirely. What grows in the squares? Once the checkerboards are stabilized, the planting begins. The species selection matters more than almost any other decision in the project. Plant the wrong tree in the wrong place, and you waste years of effort. The trees die. The soil never recovers. The grid blows away. The desert wins. Chinese ecologists have spent decades identifying species that can actually survive at the edges of these deserts. Saxal, a small woody shrub native to the region, is one of the most important. It tolerates extreme drought. It develops a deep root system that anchors loose substrate. It can survive on rainfall amounts that would kill most other woody plants. Desert poplar grows faster than Saxal, develops broader canopy that produces shade, and tolerates salty soil better than most alternatives. Red willow, native almond, and certain hawthorn varieties round out the mix in different microenvironments. The actual planting process is precise. Mechanical augers drill holes at the center of each straw square. Seedlings, raised in nurseries with carefully controlled water and nutrient regimes, are transplanted into each hole. A measured volume of water is added. The soil is compacted to ensure the roots make full contact with the moist layer beneath. In many cases, drip irrigation lines are run between the squares to deliver minimal water during the seedling's most vulnerable first year. What started as a few isolated plants becomes, over years, a connected network of vegetation that holds the dunes in place and creates the microclimate necessary for further plant species to establish naturally. The desert highway powered by the sun. There is one specific stretch of this project that demonstrates how far the techniques have evolved. The Taklamakan Desert Highway runs for over 436 kilometers across the heart of the Taklamakan. The road would have been impossible to maintain because shifting dunes would have buried it within months without continuous protective vegetation along its length. The solution was a green belt, planted along the entire length of the highway, that needed enormous amounts of water in a region where rainfall is essentially negligible. The water came from below, groundwater hundreds of meters down, accessed through 86 pumping stations. The energy to run those pumps came from above, solar panels. The Taklamakan receives more than 2,700 hours of sunlight per year, ranking among the highest solar exposure regions in the world. Each pumping station hosts hundreds of photovoltaic panels, generating enough electricity to extract groundwater from depths exceeding 100 meters. That water is distributed through underground drip irrigation pipes to more than 200,000 trees lining the highway. The result, by China's classification, is the world's first carbon-free desert expressway. Sunlight produces electricity. Electricity produces water. Water sustains a green corridor through one of the most hostile environments on the planet. What the numbers actually look like after decades. The official Chinese government figures on the program are striking. More than 30 million hectares of barren land have been regreened since 1978. Forest cover nationally has risen from 10% at the program's start to over 25% today. The frequency of major sandstorms in northern China has dropped by approximately 82% compared to peak levels in the 1980s. The number of dusty days in some affected cities has fallen from around 100 per year to closer to 30. These are the headline numbers. Most of them appear to be broadly accurate, supported by satellite imagery and independent verification from international research teams. Cities that used to disappear under spring dust storms now experience meaningfully cleaner air. Villages at the edge of the Taklamakan that were being slowly buried by advancing dunes are no longer being buried. This is real change, at a scale that no other country has attempted, and it is producing measurable results. But the success comes with a complication that is worth being honest about. Why some ecologists are worried. A growing body of research, including studies from international scientists, has raised concerns about the long-term sustainability of the program. The concerns center on three issues. First, monoculture. A significant portion of the planted forest consists of fast-growing poplar trees, often as single-species plantations. At one point in the 2000s, a disease outbreak killed more than 1 billion poplar trees across northern China, wiping out years of planting in affected regions. Second, water use. Many of the species planted, including poplar and willow, require substantial groundwater to survive. In the most arid regions, this groundwater is being extracted faster than natural processes can replenish it. Some studies suggest that the trees are actually accelerating groundwater depletion in their immediate areas. Third, ecosystem health. A forest is not just a collection of trees. Plantation forests planted at high density with 1 or 2 species do not replicate the complexity of a real forest. They look like forests on satellite imagery, but they may not function like forests in any deeper ecological sense. International ecologists have been increasingly explicit that the program needs to evolve. Mixed forests instead of monocultures. Native species that match local rainfall patterns instead of fast-growing imports that need irrigation. Slower restoration that produces durable results rather than fast restoration that may collapse in 50 years. To China's credit, this critique has been at least partially incorporated into more recent program adjustments. Native species are being prioritized in newer plantings. Mixed species design is becoming more common, but the legacy of the early decades is still in place. Hundreds of millions of trees that were planted under the old model are still there, still requiring continuous attention to keep them alive. The lesson underneath all of it: the Green Great Wall is, by almost any measure, a remarkable achievement. A demonstration that human beings, given enough time and enough resolve, can take land that everyone assumed was beyond rescue and bring portions of it back to life. But it is also a reminder that the easy answer is rarely the right answer. Planting trees is not the same as restoring an ecosystem. A green satellite image is not the same as a healthy forest. The next chapter of this project, the one that gets written between now and 2050, will determine whether the Green Great Wall becomes one of the great ecological success stories of the modern era, or a cautionary tale about the limits of trying to engineer nature on a continental scale. What is undeniable is the scale of the attempt. Nothing else in human history compares to what China has tried to do here. If this gave you something to think about, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what we cover next. Turn on notifications because we are tracking more stories at this scale. And here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. If your country had the opportunity to plant a forest belt across an unlivable region of land, knowing that the long-term ecological success was uncertain, would you support the project anyway? Or do you think we should only commit to ecological restoration when the science is fully settled? Drop your honest answer below. I read every single one.